Martyn Ramsey, and welcome to the Time Capsule. Joining me this week for his second show in a row is Mr. Andy McGowan. Good evening, Andy.
Hi, Martyn.
Usually, as regular listeners will know, I only have one guest because it's really a show about their recollections of the game in question, and we try and put those memories into some kind of context. However, this match, this day, is probably the better way of describing it, is too big for just the two of us. So joining us as well is Mr. Heart and Hand himself, David Edgar. Welcome, David.
Good evening, gentlemen. Honoured to be the third wheel in this burgeoning Andy Martyn bromance here 2 weeks in a row. But I would totally agree that some days are big enough to include someone else, and I definitely feel that this would be in that category.
Before we do the usual start to the show, guys, I just want a simple yes or no answer to this question. At the end of last week's show, I trailed this episode by saying it's the most significant day in the modern history of Rangers. Was that fair or was it not? Andy first.
I would say yes, absolutely.
David?
Yes.
Good. We'll see if we still believe that at the end, but I think it's a pretty simple question. The news in May 1987 was dominated by the speculation of a general election that would eventually happen in June of that year. This was, of course, very much in the midst of Thatcherism, widely hated and fervently opposed, as we all know. Because of such a reaction, she had a parliamentary majority slashed to a frankly embarrassing and minuscule 102 seats. A couple of TV debuts around the time for Through the Keyhole and the US sitcom Alf, as we said goodbye to Jossie's Giants, Saturday Superstore and The Tube.
No!
I know.
What a hat-trick! What a month! That's awful! 3 of my favourite programmes ever!
I know, as well as the sad death not long after this game of Fulton Mackay, who of course played Mr. Mackay in Porridge, and for years I thought was the guy who made the official introductions to the players at the Open Championship golf. I think you've kind of given the game away there, David, but any of your favourites in there?
As a kid, I remember the family getting together to watch Through the Keyhole at 7 o'clock on a Friday night. And that was actually surprisingly popular at the time. I think it ran forever though, didn't it? I think it was still on in various guises like 30 years later. There's something now, I didn't know at the time, but now knowing who David Frost is and who he was and all he'd achieved, satirist, the interview with Nixon, that's an amazing man, top shagger as well. To then see him presenting a show where you basically go in and rummage around people's knickers drawers was, I don't know who came up with that, but I take it there's some good gear kicking about 80s. Jossie's Giants is my childhood, written by the late great Sid Waddell, and played by a bloke who I think would have been perfect for any TV adaptation of Viz's Sid the Sexist, because he was a spitting image. But I loved that show. Some corking shows there. Saw news about Fulton Mackay, who was just a fabulous actor, but also probably at the time more well known to me as the lighthouse keeper in Fraggle Rock.
Oh, indeed, God. Platoon, Crocodile Dundee and Stand By Me were available at the cinema, my goodness. And Madonna was top of the pops, alongside in the top 10. Now, how 1987 is this? The Smiths, Kim Wilde, Terence Trent D'Arby and Five Star. Andy, any favourites in there?
Well, my mother used to work as an usherette in a Lascala and Sockets. I used to get into all the films, even the 15s and the 18s. Well, not the 18s, but the 15s anyway. So I used to go and see them. That was how my young, fervent imagination was cultivated by watching films I should have been watching in the cinema.
Lascala was that's in Ayrshire. There were 3 cinemas, Lascala 1, Lascala 2, and then across the road was a cinema called the Metropolis, which was later...
The Regal.
The Regal, sorry, later turned into the Metropolis nightclub. Scene of many a bit of banging tunes and finger-banging action in the early 90s. But, I remember going to the Lascala to see Crocodile Dundee, actually, as a kid. So a bit of a shared experience there for us. I can't believe you get in for free. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome, actually. And then she would come home with about £400 worth of chocolate for the kiosk. And then folk wondered why I was a chubby child.
But that top 10 is just brilliant. Kim Wilde, one of my very first crushes, just the most British pop star sexette that you can ever imagine. You know, the Americans, you've got Madonna, who's just, you know, pure Marilyn Monroe sex, and then you've got Kim Wilde, who looks like an attractive primary 3 teacher.
That's very, very apt. It was a good football weekend for you, David. Bank holiday weekend, of course, as Everton won the English title on the bank holiday Monday evening. They
did indeed, yes. This was, I remember people asked me actually about Everton, why it was, and obviously the whole Gary Stevens, Trevor Steven, all that stuff. But basically, when I was a kid growing up, really young, Rangers were awful, and everybody supported, like in Cowan, supported Rangers and Liverpool. Remember those half and half hats you used to get, Andy? And you used to see loads of Rangers Liverpool ones, and everybody fucking supported Liverpool. So just to be different, because obviously I was, Rangers was kind of non-negotiable. Just to be different, I decided I would support Everton, and my uncle got me a kit when I was like 6. I got this Everton kit. You used to get football kits in a box, a big Umbro thing, and you'd arrive in this box. And so then I started cheering Everton, and then just young Edgar in the 80s was pretty good for football teams once I started taking an interest, because Everton and Rangers really began to turn around in that period. But that was a really good Everton team. They had some cracking players: Kevin Ratcliffe, Kevin Sheedy, Paul Bracewell, Adrian Heath, guys like that. They were a really good football side. They were very Rangers. They liked a battle, but they could also play football when necessary.
So see that, Davey. This is going before Ayrshire references between those two. Do you remember Scotland played Wales in the qualifier, Ian Rush and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
And they were staying at Seymour Hydro, and my dad took me down to meet them all. I'm trying to think, there was umpteen Everton players in it. Ratcliffe was what prompted my memory.
He was a captain, aye. Ratcliffe. Vandenhouw was another Everton player that was in that Wales team. It was a really good side. They beat Scotland at that game. That's the campaign that Davy Cooper scores a penalty at the end, but Wales really should have qualified. Rush and Hughes up front. I mean, come on, you should be good. You should have a chance. But they had, the guts of Everton's title-winning defence in there, because Neville Southall, of course.
That's right.
He was Welsh goalkeeper. So they were a really great team, and they had kind of 2 or 3 years, and still to this day though, Everton fans feel they were robbed of a European Cup because they feel they had a right good shot at it, but Liverpool and Heysel kind of put paid to that. So there's a fair bit of bitterness still lingers about that. But
was Andy Gray live at Everton at the time that season, Davey?
No, Andy Gray actually left after the first title-winning season, because they bought Gary Lineker from Leicester.
So it was Lineker then that left, and then Everton won the league.
That's
Barcelona, right. And they left Barcelona, and then they won the league. Lineker was the striker in the 80s, really, but won very little.
I think partly with Gary Lineker, one of the reasons for that, and it's interesting, he said the year he was at Everton, he scored 49 goals, right, which is astonishing, and then he has the World Cup in England. It's 85-86, and he gets the 6 goals, Golden Boot, and he gets his move to Barcelona. But I think he was a bit like Michael Owen in that I'm not sure that he was brilliant to have in your team, but I'm not sure that he was a team player, if that makes sense, because I don't think anyone could really play with him. And Everton had been so good, they did Sharp and Gray up front, but they decided they want a bit more mobility, and then they changed that. They bring in Adrian Heath, gets fit again after a long layoff, and plays off Graham Sharp, whereas Lineker couldn't play, really with another striker. So I do wonder if there was something. There's something in that, Martyn, that he could bag you a lot of goals, but maybe reduce the effectiveness overall of the team.
Anyway, we're here to talk about the Rangers, so let's go on with that. Penultimate game of the 86-87 season. You get 2 points for a win, of course. We are 3 ahead of Celtic with 2 games left. We've got this difficult trip to Pittodrie, a place where we had an absolutely shocking record during the 80s. I think only 2 wins in 13 years before this. Conceded 40 goals in the process. I think scored about 11. We'll get then a whole match in the final day of the season against the Scottish Cup finalist St Mirren. So effectively, we just needed a point because the goal difference was huge. I think there's a swing of about 14 goals was required. So it's one of those where if we got the point at Pittodrie, we effectively win the league, but it wouldn't be mathematically official. We need them to drop points at home to Falkirk, which is the game they had that Saturday afternoon. So I just wonder, I'll go to you, Andy, because you're slightly older than David and I. Was there any sense? Sorry about that, mate. Was there any sense of jeopardy here? I mean, on paper, as we look back 30 years later, it looks quite serene. Like, we're definitely going to get this point over 2 games. But when you've not won it for so long, if we get beaten, Celtic win, it's down to 1 point on the final game of the season. Were there any nerves, or was it just a case of it's going to be one of these days?
As a 10-year-old, I couldn't really remember any nerves. I just remembered it was this juggernaut, and this was coming to the completion of it when it started. I don't know, 8-10 months earlier when Souness actually arrived. So I can't remember anything but belief that we were going up that road to win the league. And the game itself was a kind of classic. What I've learned now as I've got older, a classic league-winning atmosphere where there's this anticipation, expectation, and that's just electricity around the ground.
So we all set up then, boys. No league title in 9 years, a period that older Bears, when I was growing up, used to describe as the bad old days and the worst that we'd ever get. Dear me. 5,000 tickets for the Beach End, as normal, but 10,000 had reportedly been sold to Bears all over the stadium. Kind of expected total of between 12 and 15,000 expected to make the trip. A 10-year-old Andy McGowan had a ticket. How did that happen?
How did it happen? Well,
he was a convener in the bus even then.
The youngest bus convener in history, that's right.
30 years man and boy.
How to guarantee yourself a ticket by Andy McGowan. Anyway, no, my dad takes the credit. So just to give you a wee bit of context, I was obviously 10. I was in the 11th of July that year, and probably 8 years old. My kind of brain exploded with Rangers. Before then, I'd probably been more interested in Star Wars and stuff like that. But even so, my dad had always taken me to football, even when I wasn't particularly interested. And then, as happens, you have this epiphany, and it just so happened that around about 1985, when Jock Wallace came back. I couldn't get enough of Rangers. I couldn't get enough of football. I couldn't get enough of playing football. It just exploded, and it was my life. And then I was blessed to have the arrival of Souness right on that mark, basically. And David, you'll know what I'm talking about. It was just the greatest time to be a kid.
Oh God!
Rangers unbelievable. So I got a ticket because my dad was going home and away. I was going to most games with him, and I actually, knowing that I was coming on this pod, I asked my dad last week. I said to him, "Dad, how did you get me a ticket for that game?" Because my memory is that we went up in the bus with Stevenson District Supporters Club. The bus was full to capacity, but there was a fair percentage of guys on that bus that didn't have a ticket, because all we up was banter between guys that had tickets and didn't have tickets, saying, "I'll give you this for your ticket, I'll give you that for your ticket, I'll do this for you, I'll do that for you." I remember sitting there saying, "I got a ticket." But anyway, it's something that as times went by, I cherish, because obviously you're with your dad. It's a momentous historic occasion for Rangers that will never ever be forgotten. So to answer your question, it's simple. We sent the voucher away and we got the away ticket, and it was just a luck of the draw.
Yeah. David, what were you doing that day?
I was going to see co-winning Rangers during the day, and they were kicking their match off early so that everybody could go and listen to the game on the radio, which is very Ayrshire. And went up to watch the game, and then came back. My dad wasn't leaving the house. He wasn't going, because he was just going to sit and listen to the radio all day, to make it go quicker, I suppose. But it was all anybody was talking about for days. It dominated school, it dominated where my dad worked, the factory nearby. It was in the street, it was all people would talk about. And you were aware, even as a child, I think, of the momentousness of it, and being at that junior football match that day, and everybody's there, Rangers strips on and talking about it, and they're all going back to watch it. They were all going to listen to watch it. They were all going to their houses or to mates or to the pub to listen to a game, which must seem so incredibly quaint to younger listeners, that people would go to a pub and sit with beers and listen to the radio, and people would be shushed and told not to play the puggy. But it was, as Andy said, as a kid, this is sort of like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Souness was the golden ticket, because Rangers, from being kind of depressing also-rans and constantly being middling, which is what they'd been really since I'd been cognisant enough to start following it, suddenly we're glamorous and we're huge and we're signing players and we've got Souness, and it was just another world. It was like when Souness arrived, he just opened the door and said, oh, by the way, out there's all this that you haven't seen. And it was different for the older guys, and I understand that, and it was different for my dad and my papa and my uncles, but for me, it just seemed like the culmination of what he had come to do. And when you then add in, you mentioned at the start, Aberdeen, at this point, the start of that season, I just thought Aberdeen were like Real Madrid, because they just pumped us royally all the time. And to be going there, I just still thought there was a fair chance we could get beat up there. Even as a kid, I was still a kind of nervous Nelly type, and my dad would still say, Aberdeen, toughest game we've got, that's just tougher than Celtic. Aberdeen at Pittodrie is the toughest game we have. So it was my first real experience of that sort of overwhelming, week-long, claustrophobic excitement / tension.
I mean, I was only 6, and now, as a 37-year-old atheist, I was actually in Blackpool on that bank holiday weekend on a church trip, believe it or not. My dad was furious, I think, that he was at the Pleasure Beach instead of the beach end. But I don't remember any build-up. I do remember something of the day, which I'll share near the end. And the relations with Aberdeen would seriously sour 17 months later with the assault on Ian Durrant. However, my understanding was that they'd been pretty bad since the late 70s, and then incident with Willie Johnson. Was there any fear of trouble that day, especially with Rangers fans just everywhere?
No, not to my memory, because it's unrecognisable. I often talk as if I'm old Father Time to younger bears, and I say that me and my dad used to go up to Aberdeen quite regularly, and it was quite a big thing getting the bus trip up to Aberdeen and a day out kind of thing. And we used to go walk up Union Street with our scarves and strips on, and they'd do bat an eyelid. And it might have been because my dad was there with a child, I don't know, but I can never ever remember any majorly bad blood at that time. There was a real recognition at Aberdeen where they were the team to beat. Basically, they were the best team in Scotland for a considerable period. But then you also had Dundee United, you had Celtic as normal, you had Hearts at that time, nearly won a league, for God's sake. So Aberdeen, if we jump back to September of that season, David, we beat Aberdeen at Ibrox, remember, 2-0.
Yes,
Souness scored, and
Leighton ran after the ref.
Bandy-legged Leighton running at the goalie, running to the ref to say it wasn't a goal, we didn't know the line. But that was a real turning point for us. But it remained that Aberdeen were one of the best teams and the benchmark, and they beat us that season, I remember. So going to Aberdeen, going to Pittodrie, it was a cauldron, but I can't remember being quite as venomous as it is now. In fact, me and my dad used to take a ball and play football down the beach before we played the games. It was crazy.
The teams wouldn't run out at the same time. Rangers were out first, and the noise is incredible. It was like a home game. Aberdeen would follow later. Rangers team is Chris Woods in goal, Jimmy Nicholl, Graham Roberts, Terry Butcher, Stuart Monroe, Dave McPherson, Ian Durrant, Graham Souness, David Cooper and Robert Fleck, Ali McCoist up front, Jimmy Phillips and Colin West on the bench. Aberdeen lined up with Jim Leighton in goal, Stuart McKimmie, Alex McLeish, Willie Miller, David Robertson, Brian Irvine, Gray, Bett, Joe Miller, Neil Simpson and John Hewitt, Brian Grant and Peter Weir on the bench. First question, boys. Everyone is in blue socks for the first time I could recall. I don't remember seeing that before. Even Chris Woods has blue with his black shorts and yellow top. Was there ever a reason for that? Did we ever find out why that was?
We were Red Sox that season, and the referee claimed that it would lead to a clash with the Aberdeen strip.
That simple.
That's simple.
I don't remember. Did we wear them with the other games against Aberdeen? Because that game you talk about, Andy, that was my first ever game. I don't remember us wearing the Ibrox game when we beat them 2-0.
No,
I can't remember.
No, we wore our normal strip that day, but I believe that this was just one ref. I just think it was one ref saying, no, you need to change to other socks. Because obviously you're not going to recognise somebody who's wearing blue and white going up against somebody who's wearing all red. It's just going to be impossible. Who knows, back then it could even have been, the people in black and white will struggle to tell the legs apart at an incident. It's a different era.
True. So the game itself, and Durant has an early effort from outside the box after a Souness free kick is headed clear by Brian Irvine, but it is pretty tame and Leighton isn't overly troubled. Very clear from the outset that this isn't going to be a football match for the purists. I think the ball is the victim pretty much throughout the game. And I don't think that famous Aberdeen breeze is helping the tension either. Souness is warned quite early for high feet in the middle of the park, and it wouldn't be the last time he was involved like that. Dave McPherson is robbed in the Aberdeen half by Jim Bett, and then the Aberdeen attack progresses from there. Graham Roberts eventually blocks for a corner. From that corner, Brian Irvine gets a very good head on the ball, but Chris Woods is equal to it. Andy, how important was he in what happened that season? I think we had Woods pretty much at the peak of his career, I think.
Woods was a top class goalie. When Woods came, and you've got to remember the kind of relative quality we had before he arrived with Nicky Walker, basically seen before, I think, wasn't it, David?
It was.
And so Nicky Walker was still there, but he was a reserve keeper. But Woods was just a cut off. And as soon as first of all, it looked like a male model. He was built like a male model. And he was just class personified as a goalkeeper. And I remember him very, very quickly that season. The Rangers fans knew we'd got a real goalkeeper here. He was England number 2 as well, so that kind of preceded him, that kind of reputation. But no, my memories of Woods that season is that he was immaculate. He was an all-round goalkeeper, cross-ball saves, everything. He could do it. He kind of tailed off in later seasons, but my memory of that season is a golden boy, definitely.
Yeah. Souness gets booked for a wild challenge and Brian Irvine in the halfway line that would be an absolute automatic red card these days. There's no complaining about it. John Hewitt beats the offside trap and takes us by surprise after, shall we say, a lofted aerial pass from Alex McLeish. But he kind of wastes the chance and we eventually clear. It's all Aberdeen really, but I guess that's much to be expected when we travelled up there, David.
Absolutely, and not a huge surprise that they were dominant in that game, because remember, they didn't quite like this new dynamic. They weren't keen on it at all. They had been Scotland's Premier team really for since 1980. You could argue, and yeah, Dundee United would win a league and Celtic would win, I think, a couple, but overall Aberdeen were the team to beat, and I don't think they liked this. I think that Aberdeen twigged what this meant long term before we did. I think that's why Ferguson decides this year is the year he's gonna seriously entertain thoughts of leaving and buggers off. I think that they had realised that this signalled something completely different, because you're going to get Dundee United will have a good side, or Celtic at the time could have a good side, or Hearts, but this money, this spending, this total new direction wasn't something that they could just rely on getting, good scouting and signing good players and having a good manager, which up to then you kind of could do. You just need to look at Dundee United. You get a good manager, he gets a good team, you've got a fair run at the title. We spoke about Everton at the start, that's how they won the league, because that was all you had to do back then. And Rangers sort of signalled no, those days are coming to a close. And of course, Aberdeen, as we know, have never come close again. But look at that team of winners that they have that day. These are guys who all have medals in their collections already, and they are not keen on not only us arriving as the new dominant force, but doing it in their backyard. The Souness thing, you mentioned that tackle. It's absolutely a straight red these days. You know, we talk about Paul Gascoigne would get too hyped for certain matches.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure Souness wasn't that day, because it's right from the start, and I think Souness was too hyped that day. More so even than he would have been as a player, in inverted commas, when he was at Liverpool, say. I think that day, the enormity of it and what he was about to achieve hit him, and I think he was just too fired up that day. And Graham Souness, when he's fired up, is, shall we say, a somewhat aggressive individual. When he's maybe just a touch, and maybe when he's too fired up and up against guys that would be his peers in the Scotland squad, you know, Miller, McLeish, these guys. So I can understand that there's a lot of ingredients there for quite a combustible situation.
Yeah,
the dynamic of that season, Martyn, as well, was there was a massive swing. We talked about that game in September when we beat them. So Ferguson was still in charge of Aberdeen.
He left in October, I think.
And so there was that, and then the kind of a waiting giant in Rangers, as David says. And I remember that we used to think to them, where's your Fergie gone? Where's your Fergie? I pissed him off, right? And it was just as if we were saying, like, yous are finished, we're back here now. It kind of proved that way as well.
Graham Roberts, Chris, was getting a bit of a tangle under pressure, but again, thankfully nothing really comes of it. Dave McPherson is sent through into the box, but Brian Grant, the substitute, does very well to get the ball back. Boys, Dave McPherson, right winger, discuss what on earth is he doing playing in that position today?
I have no memory of that whatsoever.
I remember it vaguely.
He absolutely is. Because Jimmy Nick's right back.
Jimmy Nick's right back. He's on the right. We used this a few times in away games, and I'm not quite sure of the thinking. And I suppose it must have worked because, spoiler, we win the league. But I wouldn't necessarily have ever looked at Dave McPherson, even young Dave McPherson, and say, oh, you can see the attributes that make you think that. But we've kind of now grown up where there's a real orthodoxy about 4-4-2 when it's played, which is, you know, your holding midfielder, your attacking midfielder, your wide midfielder and your winger. I can see Souness saying Aberdeen are good on the flanks, which they were. They were very good. I'm going to put McPherson there to stop them coming down that side. And I'll concentrate. That'll just let Durant and Cooper play, and me and him will make sure the back door's locked. So I remember it at Tynecastle as well, taking place, Dave McPherson on the right wing. And I think it was just the tactic of if a team had because Hearts at the time played 4-3-3, and I do wonder if it was maybe just I want you there as a blocker, but you see the other side of that when he's put clean through. And you know that gif of the horse falling over the big ball?
Yeah.
That's exactly what it looks like, man. It's just identical. He's even got a huge mane of hair.
It's incredible here. But from that failed attack, Brian Grant sends the ball into the midfield for Brian Irvine, and who else is waiting for him but our player manager? What can only be described really as a kind of karate kick, both feet off the ground. Again, it would be a straight red now with a 5-game ban. It's absolutely horrendous, and Souness walks. He's famously never sent off, of course, in his entire career in England, and he made a big deal of that, I think, during this period, because this would be, of course, his second red card of the season. But I'm not sure any of the red cards up here were in any way debatable. Had he just lost a yard of pace by that time when he turned up the road, or was this a deliberate ploy? Hoggy and I did the famous 2-2 draw with Celtic in October 87, so just over a season since his arrival, and we've had 10 red cards in that time. Was this us making a metaphorical as well as a kind of physical stamp on the game here? Andy first, and then you, David.
I don't think there's any doubt that Rangers were we were the big scalps, and I think for the referees as well, there was a bit of that. There was if you remember, there was referees there, big personality referees. I mean, we think the referees now are bad, but if you think back then, you had, I think off the top of my head, you had Syme, who was quite good, you had Waddle, who was an absolute maniac, you had McGinley, who was okay, I think who else was the kind of crack?
Valentine and Hope.
Aye.
Hope. Was there
Aye, Davy Hope.
Davy Hope.
Aye, was it
Dougie Hope.
Two brothers, aye. But these guys were pure theatrical drama queens. That I mean, Andrew Waddle was the worst. But who was the referee that day? Did you get that in your research?
Jim Duncan.
I can't remember him.
He was generally he was from Motherwell, because they used to give out the referees where they were from. And basically they used to say, here's the referee, Jim Duncan of Motherwell, and it would come up on the wee chyron on the screen, Jim Duncan.
It did, aye.
Motherwell.
Jim Duncan was, of course, the referee at the 2-2 game in October.
Well, he clearly just hated as the prick.
They're all hell broke loose. Davy Syme's another one, of course, who sent Souness off at Parkhead in the first game of the next season, and Souness, as Holgie and I mentioned in that podcast, called him a big fucking poof after it. But there was something there, Davy, or was it just, as I said, he just lost that yard of pace after leaving England?
Bit of both, change of focus as well. He's not just playing now, he's the manager, and I think he saw himself as having to look after his boys when he was on the field as well, and set an example. There's a lot of different psychological pressures here. It's a really interesting thing to ponder, the change from being the leader of the team, which he'd always been through his career, and captain, of course, but to then be the manager as well, and all that attendant stuff, and be the mark man, and be the guy that everybody wants to get involved with. I think there's also the old gunslinger thing as well, that he was very aware that people would try to make a name for themselves off of him, and I think, being Souness, his attitude was, I'll get my retaliation in first. It's a lunatic challenge for somebody on a yellow card. But also, I think what we do have to remember is, being sent off in the first half in the 80s was just shocking. It didn't happen. And I think there was an element of that in his decision making, that, well, a referee's not going to send me off in the first half, because stuff like that happened all the time back then. You could get away with anything if you did it in the first 20 minutes. You could bring out a knife and carve your wife's initials onto someone's back. If it read 18 minutes 36, you'd get a talking to. So there were, I hate to say there were different rules. I suppose Cammy would say that there's different interpretations of the rules. But Andy was spot on with Souness' personality. Really just cast this huge shadow over Scottish football, and there were a lot of, there still are, but there were a lot of uppity people in Scotland, the whole Kent your father attitude, which was hugely displayed towards Souness. And the referees at the time, they were golf club secretaries, they were Rotary Club members, they were very officious, they were very studious, and I think they saw in him someone who was being cheeky to the teacher in front of class, and that they knew they could make a huge impact with any decision against him. Over and above all of that, let's not kid ourselves here, he's committed 2 fucking assaults and it's the readiest red card you'll ever see in your life.
And the Rangers players, I mean, they surround Jim Duncan, the referee. They're numerous and they're vociferous, reminding me very much of Ferguson's United back in the 90s. But Andy, 12 minutes the first half remaining, obviously the whole of the second half to go, 10 men, the leader's gone. Well, one of the leaders, because that team was famously full of them now, but we're at this absolute bogey ground. Were you worried about getting the job done now?
My recollections were that there was no sympathy for Souness at that point in time, and there was a kind of feeling that he's fucked it for us. I can remember that quite clearly, actually, because this guy's your hero, this guy's your saviour, and then he's went and done that so early in the game against a really good Aberdeen team, as we've established, a really good team even with 11 men against them. So, the nerves just get put up a notch because you're so close, you can taste it. We've waited so long for this. The older bears that were running about me obviously had a far greater context than I did as a young kid, but it was as if we put this in jeopardy. What's going to happen? It was a definite. I think worry's an understatement, to be honest.
I think there's interesting modern parallels here, if you'll forgive me for taking it down this route, with maybe the attitude to people our age and older with someone like Morelos compared to maybe younger fans, where the younger fans, I think, get surprised that we don't always instinctively just rally round, regardless of whether or not the player deserved it or whether or not the player's behaviour is showing a pattern. And I think that they get frustrated by that, by he's one of ours, you just back him, don't do this. Whereas, as Andy says there, this is Souness, and he is beloved by the Rangers support, right? I mean, he is absolutely beloved. He is a god to us, even at this point. And yet, yes, that's the reaction. That was the reaction in my house, from all my uncles, from my dad, from me. When we spoke about it afterwards and everybody's camera, it's still the same thing. He needs to curb he needs to stop that. He's got to screw the nut, as we say in Scotland. It's maybe just an interesting divergence in how people view it, that I think back then, especially when we grew up and what we were educated to, was it's all about the team and the individual, no matter who he is and no matter how much we love him. If he fucks up, or we feel he is going to get told that. We're not going to hide, and we're not going to sugarcoat it, and we're not going to pretend that it's due to other reasons. And I do think that's why when you see something like Ryan Jack, there's genuine levels of affront among Rangers supporters, because I think we are genuine in that if one of our players deserves it, I think, as I say, especially we will say, no, that was your fault. And I think that it's maybe something that's changed slightly. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
No, I think that's fair enough. The match rumbles on, of course, after that. Willie Miller blasts over from 35 yards, but no real danger for the Rangers. It's his 32nd birthday that day. Now, my girlfriend's 32. Willie Miller does not look the same age. I mean, he almost looks like 45 pretty much throughout his career. I mean, I just can't even imagine him being a boy.
He had to be born with a moustache, that's the thing.
I think so.
Willie Miller looked, as you say, 45, which was great for him, because if you see him now, actually, he looks pretty good for his age, because he's one of those people that, because he always looked old, now that he is old, but he looks the same as he did 15 years ago, you go, he's aging well. I think there's that to him. I was intrigued by you saying, Willie Miller with a shot. Willie Miller goals were rocking horse shit. I think he had 65 caps for Scotland and 1 goal. He was not somebody that scored a lot of goals. I don't think we can accurately convey to younger listeners, because they're not going to believe that the phrase I'm going to say it, but I am going to say it. Aberdeen genuinely had one of the best central defensive partnerships in Europe. And yes, laugh away, they did. Willie Miller and Alex McLeish were superb defenders, and I'm frightened by how much they would cost in today's market.
On 40 minutes then, David Cooper's blocked by Stuart McKimmie just on the edge of the box near the byline. I guess we'll get some respite and a genuine opportunity. Cooper flights it over, Butcher beats everybody to it and utterly thunders in a header from close range. The noise is unbelievable. Andy, you're at the other end of the ground. Did you have much a view of it, and what was that feeling like as it just erupted?
I can't remember the goal. I can't remember it. But I do remember the celebrations, because it was pandemonium. And I remember it was pandemonium all round the ground. It was as if all these, no even pockets, these large swathes of Rangers fans that were in Aberdeen end just erupted, and it was to listeners that haven't get any concept about the beach end was so the beach end is where the big stand is at Aberdeen Pittodrie ground, and it was like I don't know, David, how you describe it? A big wooden shed kind of thing, but it was big.
It was huge. It was like a big wooden air hanger with missing one wall. It was just benches.
It benches, and we had that whole thing, and it was massive. It was very, very kind of steep and tall, and to my young eyes, it was massive. That whole place with Barmy and bodies lying about, it's just like any goal you get now, but you look back and you think, Christ almighty, how did I survive that kind of thing? Because it was such a momentous goal at such a point in time, and we're down to 10 men, and Aberdeen were kind of turning the screw a wee bit. On a personal level, Butcher was my hero. I used to play centre half for the boys' brigade and all this kind of stuff, and I don't know if you remember, I used to roll his sleeves up, but I used to roll them up in a special way. I used to fold them a fairly specific way, and I used to do that with my BB strip, and I used to wear Adidas boots, this kind of stuff, so I could be like Terry Butcher. So that was an epitome of a Terry Butcher goal, just raw, attacking, power, boom, straight in the back of the net, nearly went through the net with a header.
Davey, is such an iconic goal.
Yeah, the celebration still etched in my. It's like a primal roar from him.
Yeah.
Terrifying sight, incidentally. It is. It's just this guttural explosion of emotion, and I remember listening to it, as I say, the family, and then the next thing I remember actually is being absolutely soaking in booze. Because every day all my uncle's cans were getting flung all over the place, and people are dancing and jumping up and down and singing and stuff, and maybe that's how I ended up the way I did. But it was just, and me being me, the second after it had gone in, I'm the first, back to the radio, just sitting there, waiting on long time to go kind of thing, and it's hard to explain how a goal that you hear can be more memorable than some that you've seen, but it was. And I still remember the commentary and the noise that you could hardly hear the commentators over the cheering from the Rangers fan. And the commentator said, it's clear now there's far more than 5,000 Rangers fans in Pittodrie today. And it was just, superb. And then when a big goal went in for a Rangers match back then, against, say, Celtic or one like this that really mattered, you would hear it in my street, if you know what I mean, because you would hear everybody in various houses shout at once. So I remember that really, and it was just remarkable. But then, as I say, me being me, I'm like, right, okay, back, I'm obviously a wee boy, I'm not drunk, they're all dancing and singing and having the time of their life, whereas I'm going, right, okay, let's get to half time. And my dad's not a big drinker, so he's the same. He's basically trying to get my uncles off and give him peace so he can get back to listening to the game. But it was, I think it was great that it was Butcher that got that, because there's so many great, narrative things if you want to look for. Souness lets us down, he does, but Souness goes, and the real on-field leader of that team, even then, steps forward, because he had been the real on-field leader of that team, and that was, I think, a great reward for that, at a time when we all needed him to do it, and he did.
You're saying that probably what every Rangers supporter, I imagine, was saying was, look, get to half time. What we nearly do is it's injury time in the first half, and Stuart McKimmy's turn to win a free kick when he and Stuart Monroe collide just outside the Rangers box after a nice ball from McLeish. It's the kind of coming together that always favours the attacker, I think. And then Bears everywhere whistling for the half-time whistle. Jim Bett flights in a brilliant ball, takes Woods out of the equation. Joe Miller somehow does well to get a header back into the area from the back post, and Brian Irvine, legs somehow still working after Souness' attention, manages to hook it home. 1-1 at half-time. Some pretty poor defending, Andy.
It was a disappointment. My recollection is it was as if it was coming, despite the euphoria of the goal that half since Souness went off. I think Aberdeen were kind of the more dominant of the two teams. But you're just glad to get the goal in the first instance because you're doing it to 10 men. So the fact that they scored, are still alive. We still only needed a point. Disappointing, but you're alive in the game.
Okay, Souness does some moving about at half time, or Smith probably does it. Jimmy Phillips comes on for Robert Fleck to, I guess, bolster the midfield. McCoy wins a free kick, and Butcher's unlucky not to repeat the trick from Cooper's free kick, but it's just too much of a strain to get any power and direction on it. Joe Miller then rattles the Rangers post from a deflected shot from just outside the box as Aberdeen had this period of seemingly endless unchallenged possession. McLeish is a good effort from range that Woods does well to get behind. Both players then combine to give Aberdeen probably the best chance of the game. There's a header from the edge of the box by McLeish from a corner. It finds Joe Miller unmarked 3 yards out, but he can't divert his header goalwards. We're kind of sitting in now to protect what we can, guys. At this time, we're 1-1. Celtic are at home to Falkirk, and they're 1-1. And then with 4 minutes left at Parkhead, Falkirk go 2-1 up. It's the kind of comedy goal that I would grow up knowing and loving at Parkhead. Pat Bonner is a disgrace, really. He's just an absolute calamity. And the scorer is a certain Jimmy Gilmore, who's the nephew of Jimmy Johnstone.
Right.
So it was a nice little twist of fate.
I'm kind of proud that neither me nor Andy knew that.
Well, I thought it'd be in the news at the time. But minutes to go now. They're to 1 down. Eventually, the final whistle goes there. And as everyone did in the 80s and 90s, someone would have a tranny with them at football, and that's not a reference to the current Celtic manager, but we knew we were safe in the knowledge now that even if we got beat, even if Aberdeen nicked a last minute winner, it wouldn't make any difference. We'd still be 3 points ahead with just 1 game to go. We would be champions. And the final whistle did blow. Colin West, ironically, as soon as his first signing, has the ball when the whistle that a generation of fans have waited for finally blew. First things first then, Andy, where are you on the pitch, and do you still have the goalposts?
The God's honest truth is I asked my dad and he wouldn't let me. That's the God's honest truth, and because I was a good wee boy I did what my dad told me. But when the Celtic, you're talking about the radio and transistor radios and stuff like that, so that came through to us and it was pandemonium, and because you're basically there, it didn't really matter what happened, and so the Bears are immediately propelled into party mode, and you just want that game finished so you can do what you do best, which is go in that part and rip the place up. But I couldn't believe the sights I was seeing. I remember just being totally and utterly bewildered about what I was seeing when I about me. There was grown men greeting. There was folk itching to go in that park. It was just, I love the move to the day I die. What happened when that final whistle blew?
David mentioned guttural and primal. I mean, it's almost a decade of absolute frustration and just being released.
Aye, it was. That's exactly what it was. It was relief. It was a release. It meant so much to so many that day, and it was a combination of such a whirlwind season. So basically, started seeing it was as if Souness pressed a button and says, "We are now the biggest club in Britain," and it was a kind of manifest destiny that we were going to win the league. But it was still beyond our dreams to do so quickly and in such a manner, because at some points that season has been it wasn't always certain. It was in the balance, that kind of outcome. But for it to happen and to beat Aberdeen at Pittodrie, I'd not beat them, but to get a point at Aberdeen, to win the league against them, I suppose, was something in itself. But absolutely unbelievable. I remember looking at my dad, and my dad's quite a cool character, right? But even he was kind of overtaking it. But the Bears were going Tonto.
How was the trip home? How was leaving the ground? Did it just spill on for the rest of the night?
So I remember we were in that ground for quite a while after it. So the pitch invasion started, and I generally said to my dad, can I go in? And he says, no, you cannot. And I just sat there and I watched it. And then the crossbars are in two, and obviously Aberdeen fans aren't too happy, so they're away. But the place was just devoured with Rangers fans. Eventually, the place come back out. So I remember they kind of forced the pitch to be cleared, as you would do, because the team were not come back out and we were saying we want the Rangers, and all that kind of stuff. Eventually it got cleared, and then out that wee tiny tunnel down at the side, Souness and Smith and the players come out, and they're just, it's no like a wee jog. They are running on adrenaline. They're just it's rocket fuel. And then the Bears will come back on again. So the memory I've got of going out, and this is the most vivid memories I've got of that whole day. I can remember people crying. I remember more than one person sitting crying with their head in their hands, just with sheer and utter joy. And the last thing I'll say about leaving the ground is you had to go over a hill. I say a hill, it was like a mini mountain. It's still there, obviously, but the Rangers fans were forced, hail, rain or shine, to come out the back of the beach end and walk up this grassy hill. It was huge, and if it was blowing a gale, then you get blown to fucking, it was terrible, and then you ended up in your bus soaking. So we're walking over that hill, and everybody's jumping about and singing and dancing, and there's this guy, and he's in all fours, and he's in the undergrowth. All you can see is his arse and jeans, and we could hear him, and my dad's like, "You alright, mate? You alright?" He turned round and he looked at us, and he went, "I've lost my fucking teeth." And I thought, I'm 10 years old, I thought this was the funniest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And I often wonder if that guy ever found his teeth.
David, what were your memories of that night?
I remember when the final whistle went, and I don't know if I was just too stupid or too nervous, but when they all started dancing and saying, "That's it, we've won now," and I'm like, "No, we haven't," and they're like, no, Celtic are getting beat. And I'm like, yeah, but our game's still going on, and they're trying to explain to me. And then when it finally sunk in, I was like, well, but if they score again, and Celtic always score in the last minute, so again, I couldn't relax up until the announcement came. And listening on the radio, every Aberdeen attack sounded like they had three players running through on goal every time. So up until it happened, they're already celebrating, and I could hear from the outside that so was Darren's terrace. But then it happened, and I remember everybody's going mad. My dad, though, who, like I say, soberest in the room, not a big drinker, he picked me up and just gave me a hug, and I started kind of beating on his shoulders, we've won the league, and he's like, we've won the league, and then just dancing up and down, and all my uncles coming over and ruffling my hair, and hey, we won the league and that, and then wanting to get out to run it into the street, and then there's all my pals and we're all running about, and a ball's produced, and then all the guys spill it, and then within about half an hour all the women are bringing out plates of food, pies and sandwiches and stuff. And I remember it's quite a grey day in Kilwinning, and nobody cared, and the houses are those kind of traditional, in my street are those kind of traditional, the four flat buildings that they have, and everybody's got like a front garden, so all along the street people are in front gardens, and they're just walking from house to house, and carryouts moving about, and it's going to sound really biscuit tin, but you knew all your neighbours, they stayed there for years, so it was just that, and dancing and singing. Everybody was singing that night. There was no music, it was just everybody was singing Rangers songs and stuff. And then eventually my mum came out to get me, to tell me I had to come in, and I went in, and I was going to complain, but then she went, sports scene's on soon. Sports scene wasn't on for another hour and a half, she lied, but she used that time to make me go and take my bath and get ready. But then when I came out, she's like, sports scene's going to be on soon. I sat down and made sure I had the video in and recorded it, watched sports scene, then I had to go to my bed. But I was up the next morning at 6 o'clock, couldn't sleep, and I got up and I watched it 3 times. It was that's why I think it is so burned in my memory, the highlights in particular. Like Colin West has the ball, as you said, at the end, but has the good grace to look suitably kind of sheepish. about celebrating it, whereas because he's hardly played, whereas the rest of the team just go fucking tonto. And then it showed you them coming out afterwards, and again there just seemed to be thousands of Rangers players. Souness is in the, you know, that grey and blue tracksuit we had. Remember that? And he still looked a bit kind of. I think it would take him. Yeah, I think it would take him a couple of days to think about the whole season and not that afternoon. I think you could see that he was still. I don't know if sheepish is the right word. I don't know if Graham Souness does sheepish, but I think he was still replaying that afternoon in his head and hadn't quite moved on to the look what we did thing. And I think that's what the St Mirren game was then all about. And that was essentially just a big party.
It would have been a personal disappointment to Souness because a big character, big ego. I don't think he envisioned the culmination of his hard work in this championship win would have been him in the dressing room. I think there'd have been a bit of a bash to his ego, the fact that he nearly scuppered it.
Interesting you mentioned that recording it, David, and then watching it. I'm sure I did the same, but I definitely did the same with STV's, I don't know, hour long documentary that season, The Rangers Revolution. I don't know if it came out on the Sunday following it, or maybe it was the next week, but that was burnt. My video player, I think, was in smoke the amount of times I watched that and the full game of the 86 Skull Cup final.
The other one I remember is the next day when, you know, hangovers are being had in the street and stuff and everybody's just calming down a bit. I remember Sports Scene 5 o'clock, Scott Sport 5 o'clock, Sports Scene was the Saturday night. They had the Celtic game. And I remember all my kind of, what I now know is, you know, my uncles who are all having a curer, sitting just laughing uproariously at Pat Bonner. And I remember them showing streams of people leaving Celtic Park at that point, and that almost just made it sweeter, you know, to then you had to wait to see that highlight, but that just added to it. And then the video went back on and we watched it for the umpteenth time. It was wonderful.
Do you remember the single that came out, Champione?
Yes, loved that.
The Premier League featuring Billy Rankin. I think I must have played that about 3,000 times in repeat.
It was blue, wasn't it?
Oh, it was brilliant.
It was a picture of Souness in front of the gates.
It was a blue cover, a 7-inch single, picture of Souness on that, overlaid on this blue background and the gates and the Championes. Not the most complicated song in the world, you have to say. But
fantastic lyrics.
I loved it. Well, yeah, I was a big fan of the lyrics. And then, you know, this is also something. The build-up began to the St Mirren game because, in a way, it was almost as much a part of it that, you know, we were going to that, and a lot of Bears were going to that. Obviously, that quite clearly couldn't have been at Pittodrie. So it became it was almost like we're getting ready for a party. And I remember it having quite a big build-up as well, even though obviously it was settled. But I'd never seen Rangers waving the league trophy, and I'd heard about celebrations when you won the league, and it became the next focus almost. It wasn't like we've won the league and everybody relaxed. There was still not so much for the game. Nobody really cared. We won 1-0. Robert Fleck scores early, but it wasn't about that. It was about this communal experience of everybody is now going to get their chance to go along and enjoy this. And it almost, I see as almost an addendum to this game, if you like.
Yeah. But it was more than that, David. There was a sense that this was just the beginning. It was as if an empire was about to be born.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the fact he'd won that.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. Just quickly, my only recollection that day, it really is the only thing I do remember, is my dad using a payphone, probably around 6 o'clock, to call home. Not in a phone box. It was attached to the wall, that kind of perspex hood over the top or whatever. In the pleasure beach somewhere. I think we might have been swimming or something like that. I remember him saying Celtic get beat, and he turned round to me, maybe some of his pals, but he looked right into my eyes, and he raised his fist the way that Souness did up to the main stand at Hampden after we'd won the Skull Cup.
Yes.
Just that kind of clenched fist. And this was his generation's moment more than mine, obviously. But it gave birth to everything that we were lucky enough to indulge in the decade that followed. Archie Macpherson was also the commentator on the day for Sports Scene, and after it he chose 3 people to interview: Terry Butcher, Graham Souness, David Holmes. Not to get sacrilegious, but that really was our holy trinity that season, no?
Oh yeah, and it's good that David Holmes, who Murray, I think quite deliberately and shamelessly airbrushed from history, getting his due, and I hope that people go back and appreciate what he did for Rangers. And this was his revolution, and it wasn't something that was universally popular in the boardroom at Ibrox. You know, it took him, and he said himself that people were waiting for him, or waiting for it to fail. And yeah, to me, he just, see, I'm a kid, he just seemed like, you know, another granddad. And, you know, somebody that you got this kind of warm, protective feeling from, that he was going to look after us. Then you had Souness, firebrand, hero, just cool as fuck. And then you had Butcher, who probably still epitomises to me what a Rangers captain should be. When we talk about it in modern times, I'm probably spoiled because I look back and think Rangers captains should be Terry Butcher, Richard Gough.
No, I think that's fair enough. The game itself, Andy, it wasn't the cliffhanger, right? It wasn't the cliffhanger really that the game against Aberdeen '91 would be, where the whole nine was in jeopardy. Really, not that we knew at the time if we'd lost that. But you know, it was either going to happen that day or the following Saturday. But it, not so much a time capsule episode to look back on a glorious game of football, because it absolutely wasn't, but it was what that day signified more than anything else.
It was momentous, absolutely momentous. It takes us back to what you said at the start of the programme, about it being a single most important event in modern Rangers history. I'm really, really privileged, right, that I was there. I didn't appreciate it for a long, long time, but the older you get, the more you think, Christ, I was there, that is really something, because it wasn't easy to get a ticket for there. So that one's a salute to my dad.
We can all echo that. What next then? Did you feel at the time, you know, we're here for keeps? In terms of 9 in a row, I don't remember that ever being mentioned until '93, when my dad did let me run on the park at Broomfield, Andy, by the way.
That's terrible.
I know, it's disgraceful. But there's an editorial in the Evening Times, I think it might be Alan Davidson, I'm not entirely sure, on the Monday after. He said, right now, any bookmaker prepared to offer any kind of odds against them retaining their championship is entitled to qualify as a philanthropist. Rangers are firmly back in the driving seat of the game, and it might be no exaggeration to say that Scottish football could be in for a spell of one club domination, similar to that enjoyed by Celtic under the late Jock Stein. Was there, I mean, you touched on it a minute ago, that clear sense that this is just the start and we're going to be here for as long as we can see?
Aye. I mean, you're talking about Holmes. Holmes was softly spoken, but very, very reassuring. There was a clear vision for the club. There was a clear conviction that this was the way it was going to be. It wasn't a one-off. There was going to be further investment. There was no way that there was going to be anything else but that with Souness at him, because he was just so driven, all-consumed, 100% winner, and he'd be trying to surround himself with like-minded players. So to my mind back then, I remember that it was just tunnel vision, Davey, wasn't it? It was just a case of that we are back, we're staying here, and in fact it's going to get better and better. Didn't quite work out that way for next season, right enough, but I think the next season is a salutary tale to all bears that lose the heat. Yes,
exactly. When I was a kid, my memories of it mostly are about how I felt rather than how I thought. Quite often, they're more vivid to me. I just felt that Rangers were different, that we were better, and that's not just, you know, comedy arrogance, or that I'm trying to say, oh, yeah, because we're Rangers. We'd been pish. I was used to us being pish. I was used to us not competing for trophies, and within a year we've attained, in my mind, this sort of almost regal status that Liverpool had in England and that Manchester United would later have. And it was, nothing can stop us. You know, the other teams can't. They all suddenly seemed very old and very...
old-fashioned, certainly.
Yeah. They seemed like they belonged to a different generation. They didn't seem... like we were all about the future, and we were all about what we were going to do, and we were going to do innovative things, and we were going to sign the top players, and we were going to, you know, go for it in Europe. And I just couldn't see how any team could live with us moving forward. Now, okay, the next year, bit of a false start. We get that. We've spoken about this on this show, Martyn. It's a transitional year. Souness, I think, about halfway through, realises that and uses it as that. But then the sort of almost serene confidence and knowledge that we were the best kicks in. And for 15 years, it's true. Then, you know, there's been the slide and to where we are, and then the uptick again to take us to where we are now. But it was just this feeling, and it came not just from my wee boy heart, it came from people I trusted, grown-ups. It came from the guys on the telly, who I didn't know at the time were all cunts, although I always got an iffy vibe off that Ian Archer. But everywhere you looked, Rangers just seemed modern. Rangers just seemed geared for the 21st century, and the rest of the teams seemed stuck in where they were. And it would prove to be correct for a while. But at that point, no, Rangers were on another level. We'd moved there. And the thing was, I felt that as we'd climbed up, we'd pulled the ladder up with us.
Anything was possible. We were talking quite openly without an ounce of self-consciousness about winning the European Cup. And I mean, it's quite sobering now when you think back. But no, anything was possible, and there was excitement in that unknown.
Yep, that's true. Any younger bears listening, you will have this day of your own sometime, that sheer guttural roar of relief and joy. And if it's at Pittodrie again, it won't just be the goalposts that go, there will not be a seat left in the stadium. Thank you, boys. Hope you enjoyed it.
Oh, certainly.
Yep, loved it, mate. Thank you.
Next week, young Stuart McCall will be joining me to talk about a day where Rangers won at Parkhead for the first time in 5 years. Imagine going that long without a win there, eh? Until next time, bye for now.